Coming up, activist Ralph Nader. He's warning that Democrats could blow it again in the midterms. He's here to explain. Ralph Nader is an old friend, the longtime activist and consumer watchdog. He's made 4 runs for the Oval Office, twice as the Green Party candidate, also as an independent candidate. In a recent piece in Salon, he warns Democrats that they could blow it again. What does he mean by that? Let's find out as Ralph Nader joins me via Skype. His latest book, by the way, is To the Ramparts: How Bush and Obama Paved the Way for the Trump presidency and Why It Isn't Too Late to Reverse Course. It's out now and available everywhere. We'll ask about it in a minute. In a recent interview with Salon, you said the Democrats are weak, corrupt, and could blow it again. What do you mean by corrupt?
Well, they're so busy dialing for the same commercial campaign contributions, Larry, as the Republicans. That's how they define their race with the Republicans. And what they're doing is they're not talking about 30 million workers who need a raise. There are 30 million workers who are making less today than in 1984, adjusted for inflation. And that's a lot of votes. The federal minimum wage is frozen at $7.25 an hour. There are a few states and localities that have higher, but they're not nationalizing this issue, which Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Harry Truman would have done in a minute. They're not talking about de-bloating the waste in the defense budget documented by their own Congress and cutting back on hundreds of billions of dollars of corporate welfare and putting it into jobs all over the country, repairing America, public works, infrastructure.
That seems so obvious, Ralph. Why aren't they?
I ask that question all the time in Washington, and the answer is, well, they're on the record for this. I said, there's a big difference between rhetoric and actually going out and campaigning on it in debates. Beto O'Rourke didn't raise the minimum wage with Ted Cruz the other day. He didn't make enough of a big issue on the infrastructure and cutting out crony capitalism or corporate welfare or having less loopholes for the big corporations and put that savings back in communities all over the country. So I say, why aren't you doing this? And they say, well, we've got it. It's in our campaign literature. You know as well as I, you got to put it up front. You got to put it in the political ads. You got to put it at the grassroots campaigning. And so I finally put this question to a high official of the AFL-CIO, just the one you did put it to me. I said, how can they not run with these issues, including consumer protection? And he said, they don't want to win. I said, what? He said, they don't want to win. They want to win their seats. They want to keep raising their money, but they think if they go for the whole thing, they'll jeopardize their campaign contributions.
What if they win the House?
Pardon?
What if they take control of the House?
If they take control of the House, they got to win big, because if they just win by 5 or 6 seats, then the Blue Dog Democrats can tie up the majority Democrats in knots. So it's not enough to win the House. And someone just told me, who's followed this very closely, that the last 2 weeks for the election, this time, looks eerily like 2016. You know, Trump is creeping up in the polls. The polls are tightening. The Democrats are not landsliding the worst Republican Party in history. I mean, Congressman Jamie Raskin just put out the 20 worst votes of legislation that the Republicans in the House of Representatives got through in 2 years. And if you can't win, if you can't landslide on that, what are you in politics for? Look what FDR, Harry Truman, Lyndon Johnson would have done to this crew of Republicans. I put out a tweet the other day, Larry, and I said, the Republican politicos are energized by greed and money, while the Democrat politicos are compromised by greed and money. Look who's winning.
All right, in your latest book, To the Ramparts, by the way, what do you mean by that title?
That means all citizens. And forget about blue state, red state, liberal, conservative. People are hurting all over the country. Half of the families in this country are poor in the richest country in the world. And the unemployment rate is down fictitiously because, if you work 21 hours a week, you're considered employed. And there are millions of workers who've dropped out of the market completely, so they're not even counted. And so I think it's time for a grassroots move to recover Congress. That's where everything starts. You control Congress, you got the leverage, the fulcrum to turn the government around, turn our public budgets so they serve the people from whence they came in the first place.
You also believe in this book that Barack Obama and George W. Bush, as well as Bill Clinton, helped make it possible for Donald Trump to become president. How?
Well, it actually starts, and I can do this quickly, with Ronald Reagan, all kinds of fabrications with a smile, twisting statistics, saying things with a joke like, what about homelessness? Well, some people like to sleep out. What about hunger, Mr. Reagan? Well, some people like to go on a diet. And Trump is watching this. He's watching these wild fantasies and fabrications that Mark Green put together in a book called Reagan's Reign of Error, and he nods. And then along comes Clinton, and he makes a mess out of his relations with women and infidelities, and he gets away with it, just the way Reagan did. And Donald Trump is watching it. He says, aha. And then along comes George W. Bush and empire and drones and special forces and tax cuts for the rich. And he got reelected and he got away with it. And Donald Trump is watching it and saying, aha. And then came Obama, who expanded the drone warfare and the violation of international law and bigger budgets for the military and didn't do what he promised to do for workers and infrastructure. And he got reelected. And Donald Trump says, aha. I wonder where he got the idea, Larry.
You are giving
get away with all these things.
You're giving a lot of credit to Donald Trump.
Well, he watches TV.
All right, polling shows that this country is really divided, maybe more divided than in our lifetime, and we're the same age, you and I. Who do you hold responsible for the division?
Both parties and big corporations. They thrive on gridlock, and the way you get gridlock is you sandwich in all these divisive issues and forget about the unifying issues between conservatives and liberals. So they do the fights over reproductive rights, school prayer, things like that. But as I said in my book, Unstoppable, the Emerging Left-Right Alliance, there are 24 areas where people live, work, and raise their families. The conservative-liberal divide is nonsense. It dissipates because they both want living wage, they both want health care, they both want clean air, clean water, clean food for their children, they both want roads and bridges at work, good public transit, fair taxation, clean elections. And the powers that be, who 2,000 years or more ago learned how to divide and rule, right? That's their tactic, century after century. They never pay attention to these, Larry. And then, of course, the press doesn't open up these areas of convergence by liberals and conservatives, which would be unstoppable in Congress.
Trump calls the media disgusting, dishonest, the enemy of the people, fake. How do you describe the media and their role in all of this?
First of all, those are perfect descriptions of Donald J. Trump. You can reverse it on him. Some of the media is just a bullhorn, Fox News, Sinclair Broadcasting, just a bullhorn for Donald Trump. Other media tries to fact check them, like the Washington Post, New York Times. New York Times has tabulated 5,000 falsifications and 500 vicious vituperatives. You know how he slams people, lying Ted Cruz, and now he's going down to campaign for Ted Cruz, who called them deranged and unstable during the campaign. Ted Cruz called Trump. And then there's the mainstream media, Larry, which I think keeps rolling out his filthy and disgusting nicknames for people and the way he talks generally, and fabricates 18 fabrications a day he's up to now. Why does the New York Times cover his nicknames? Why do they cover the nicknames, which often are false against innocent people? He doesn't get any nicknames. That's where the Democrats really fall down on the job. So overall, I think the press, with few exceptions, is just his bullhorn. And that's why he's creeping up, because there's no rebuttal. They don't have any rebuttal.
Would the world have been different if Al Gore were elected, and he would have been elected if you didn't run?
No, that's not false. That's not true, because take all the ways Gore knows he wasn't selected. He won the popular vote, as you know, by 500,000. Only in America can you win the popular vote and lose the office. So Bush was selected first by the Electoral College, then by the 5-4 Scalia-led majority in the Supreme Court. 300,000 Democrats in Florida voted for George W. Bush. I'm to blame for that. All the shenanigans with hanging chads and misidentifying ex-felons in Florida, the Green Party's to blame for that. The Democratic Party's looking for scapegoats. They're looking for scapegoats.
Do you see someone that Ralph Nader could support in 2020 out on the hustings? This is the guy or gal.
Well, I like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren on domestic issues. I don't think they've got it together on foreign military and empire and all the drone warfare and all the bloated military budget. They don't seem to want to touch it. So I do it piece by piece. So Elizabeth Warren is great on Wall Street crimes. Bernie Sanders great on raising the minimum wage and full Medicare for all. So I do it piece by piece, just the way I did it on your fantastic radio program years ago, Larry, when you reached millions of people.
We can safely say there is only one Ralph Nader. Ralph, thanks for your time today.
There's only one Larry King. Thank you, Larry.